Hello and welcome to the Speakers Corner of the National Speakers Association New Mexico Chapter. This is a venue where we get to talk with some of our members about the work that they're doing. This is a wonderful chapter that we have here in New Mexico. I love it, and I'm really excited about being able to interview Gail Rubin. You'll see when it started, it said that it was hosted by Gail, but since she's being interviewed tonight, I'm doing I'm going to be the host tonight. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Gail's career, what she does, how she got started, the books that she's written. So hello, Gail.
Hello, Janelle. Great to be with you.
We've seen each other a bit lately.
Yes.
Yes. So, Gail, when I first met you at the National Speakers Association in New Mexico, I remember you're saying that you spoke on death. Now, this was maybe 4.5, 5 years ago when I first moved here. And I have to say, it really shook me, not because of death. I'm okay with that, as long as I'm here. But I had never heard about anybody who had spoken about death. And you called yourself the Doyenne of death. So how did you come up with that name?
Well, when I first became a death educator, and that's death, not deaf, because when I'm on an airplane, which we haven't had much of that kind of travel here during the pandemic, but yeah, people would hear what they want to hear, which is I'm a deaf educator. No. So when I decided to start focusing on planning ahead for end-of-life issues, my brother said, "Oh, you're the Doyenne of death." So I loved the sound of that. And I read the New York Times, which very often will throw in the term Doyenne. And so I thought everybody knew what a Doyenne was. Well, turns out, nope.
Nope.
A Doyenne is a woman who's considered senior in a group who knows a lot about a particular subject. And so that would be me when it comes to the party no one wants to plan, a funeral or memorial service. And that's how I got that title.
So, but how did you manage your career so that you're speaking, consulting? I know you're doing a number of different things, but how did your career come about? Because, I mean, mine came about in a very, very different way than I think yours did. So tell us about that.
Well, my background is actually in event planning, and, you know, funerals are the parties no one wants to plan, and public relations. And when I got married to my husband Dave in 2000, it was the second wedding for me, and we had a very creative Jewish Western wedding, and everybody had such a good time. I wanted to write a book about creative life cycle events and call it Matchings, Hatchings, and Dispatchings, about weddings and births and deaths, and I got to write a monthly feature in our local newspaper. And it was the stories about death and funerals that got the most reader response.
I would bet.
Yeah, and so I figured, you know, there's already plenty of books about wedding planning, but there wasn't much about funeral planning. And like death and taxes, you know, that's pretty much a guaranteed event that's going to happen in every family's life. So I focused on funerals, and my first book, A Good Goodbye, Funeral Planning for Those Who Don't Plan to Die, was the result. So it's everything you need to know about planning ahead with a light touch on what many consider a dark topic. And that changed the course of my career.
So can I just say this? I was just reading about John McCain, you know, the late senator from Arizona. And when he died, he planned 5 funerals. I think over 2, because they were all across the country, so they had to fly there. And people who knew him at that time said that they thought they hadn't seen him so alive and so invigorated by planning these 5 funerals.
It's, you know, it is, like funeral directors tell you, it is a gift you give your loved ones.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, you know, there are people I know who are like, I don't care, I'll be dead. And that's, gotta say, pretty selfish.
I think so.
If you love people, you will help them process your loss.
Right, right.
Your death.
And your
I say the D word.
and your mess if you leave one.
Exactly.
Which is what I think a lot of people do. So why do you think people don't plan their?
People are
They're good.
afraid of death.
Yeah.
They're afraid of not existing anymore, and the kind of prevailing thought is, well, if I plan for this, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, newsflash, it's going to happen whether you plan for it or not. So I try to bring a light touch to what many consider a dark topic and get people to break down that resistance to doing a will or a trust, to doing advanced
Right.
medical directives, to actually doing their funeral planning.
Right.
My husband and I had actually, in 2015, 7 years ago, we had gone and put our information on file and our preferences with a funeral home, but we hadn't prepaid for it. Now, we don't have kids, so having these arrangements already paid for will take a lot of pressure off whoever is put in
Yes.
charge of doing this. And that's part of that
Right.
planning process. It's like, who's your emergency contact? You know, if you don't have a husband or a wife or a spouse that would take on those responsibilities.
Because a funeral is a huge responsibility.
It is.
It is. I remember when my father died and my mother had to plan the funeral, she talked about it as it gave her something to do. And then once the funeral was over, she became quite depressed. I've often wondered if funerals don't help people get through that first shocking initial loss that occurs.
The funeral actually gives people structure.
Yes.
After your world is blown apart by the death of a loved one. And the whole idea of gathering people together and to remember that person. It's interesting because in this day and age when we don't have as much religious traditions
Yes.
that people are relying upon, certified funeral celebrants can help provide a framework to help people hold an event that honors the loved one, that helps the family process and heal, and leaves everybody having a good goodbye. And that was one of the things that I did as my transition to the Doyenne of death. I became a certified Thanatologist. That's why I have a CT after my name. That's a death educator, a fancy name for a death educator. But I also became a certified funeral celebrant. So
I had no idea these things even existed.
exactly, a lot of people don't. But it's gives me a framework to talk to people who want to honor a loved one in a very specific way. You know, their passions in life, their philosophies, their favorite music,
Right.
their favorite foods. There are so many different elements you can tie together to honor a loved one. And in fact, with so many people getting cremated these days, I also wrote another book called Hail and Farewell, Cremation Ceremonies, Templates, and Tips. And this actually has frameworks for different memorial services and readings and suggestions for music. And that's a very helpful thing.
You know, and when you talk about this, if you're married or you have somebody really close to you and that person dies and then you arrange the funeral, that's very different from somebody who is single. And because that burden then is going to fall on somebody else. And many people don't have close relatives.
Exactly. In fact, I just got an email the other day from a gentleman who has no close relatives. He's planning on donating his home to Animal Humane, but he didn't know who's going to be able to carry out his wishes. And I said, well, if Animal Humane is getting a house from you, maybe you can see if they'll be your executor.
Yes.
And in fact, my speech for the second part of this program is going to be about my experiences being a personal representative for an elderly gentleman who's
You know, and there's so many good ways to leave your money to great causes. I referred a friend to you. I don't know if you're going to work with him, but he wants to leave the bulk of his money, and he's got quite a bit of it, to the orangutans. Yes, that who are getting decimated in Indonesia. And, you know, it's unusual, and it really gives him purpose. I can feel that is the case. So tell me, I know that you speak, I know that, and you obviously write books. And I want to say this, I think that you're quite unusual because this is not a somber subject for you. You really are more of a humorist who talks about death rather than a death educator who happens to be funny. You really are, you have really made use of humor in all of your work.
Well, being a member of the National Speakers Association has been key to making some real money as a death educator, because I met a woman who teaches about sponsorships. And for the past 5 years, I've been the coordinator of the Before I Die New Mexico Festival. And with that event, I got sponsors giving me money. And who would sponsor a festival of talking about death? Well, funeral homes and cemeteries, estate planning attorneys, hospices, you know, related businesses that would want to get connected with the general public that would be willing to come and learn about planning ahead for end-of-life issues. And that has made all the difference.
And I know that the National Speakers Association has some really good advice to people who want to make a living at this. And one of those pieces of advice is, if you want to get paid, you better be funny. And I think it's true, because especially your subject is it's a heavy subject. I mean, you can't help but think about your own demise when talking about this, but the humor really helps. So, Gail, you're going to give us a little taste of what you do on platform. Yes. So if you want to get up there and organize yourself.
I will transition over there momentarily.
Yes, transition to the other side.
The other side of the studio, yes. And, but I do want to put in a shout out not only to our local NSA-New Mexico chapter, but also Toastmasters International. I'm a member of Albuquerque Challenge, a local club, which is a great opportunity to practice new material and polish it and get good feedback about.
The National Speakers Association has always been, for me, it's like your tribe. It's this group of people who, you know, what you do is so unusual. You're quite unique, and it's.
Although I do have to say, one piece of advice: we had a woman come who said, "You're a very interesting speaker, but I think you should drop the death stuff." I was like, yeah, I'm not going to pay any attention to that.
I don't think so. But I know you have really pushed through on that, and I admire you so much. I think we have fantastic members in this chapter.
Yes.
I hope people will join us. So, now.
Did you know that while 100% of us are going to die, less than 30% of us do any end-of-life planning? That's wills or trusts, advanced medical directives, pre-need funeral planning, and just talking about what we want with our loved ones. Well, if one of your family members or a friend asks you to be a personal representative or an estate executor, Know what you are getting into. Ask a lot of questions. My husband and I were friends with Sid and Jean, a lovely elderly couple that we met through our synagogue. Sid and Jean had a daughter named Suzanne, and Suzanne was exactly 6 months older than me, so Sid and Jean were like my parents. Sadly, their daughter, Suzanne, died just before she turned 50. She developed this bacterial infection that became septic, and poof, Suzanne died. Well, this was a big tragedy for Sid and Jean, and it was also an issue because Suzanne was going to be their executor for their estate, their personal representative, to carry out their wishes and their will. I mean, they redid their estate documents, and they turned to friends from the synagogue to be their personal representatives. The first representative was a woman named Lynn, who was the medical power of attorney. So if either Sid or Jean could not speak on their own behalf about their medical treatment, she knew what they wanted and could speak on their behalf. My husband Dave and I were the backups to Lynn. Now, Jean died in 2016, and leaving Sid alone, and they had been married for 66 years, so of course he was devastated, but he still lived for another 6 years. And during that time, Lynn was helping Sid with his check writing for his bills and taking him to doctor's appointments. Just before the pandemic started, Lynn decided to help Sid transition his financial affairs over to a trust company. And this is very fortunate because once the pandemic came, she could not get into his assisted living place to help him write checks. And then in another prescient move, just a few months ago, Lynn asked if Dave and I would become the main personal representatives for Sid, to do the medical representation and to be the estate executor. I don't know how this woman had her timing so perfect, but the day we had our conversation to hand over the responsibilities for Sid, Sid got sick, went to the hospital, and died the next day. I had a funeral to plan, an apartment to clean out, and relatives to contact about Sid's death. This is where being prepared can really be so helpful, not only for your personal representative, but also for the loved ones. Let me give you 3 tips about how to be prepared. Number 1, have some written guidance. Sid and Jean were very prepared when it came to this. They had artwork and jewelry and objects that were of specific significance that they wanted specific people to have. And they had put this whole list together with phone numbers, and I started calling people and saying, I'm sorry to tell you, Sid has died, and we have these objects for you. Oh, and the funeral is going to be in a week. But because they had put that list together, that made it easier for me to contact these people. However, given the short nature, I didn't have a chance to have in-depth conversations with Sid about who these friends and relatives were. And as a result, there was a relative in Florida who I didn't get in touch with until after the funeral, and she was very disappointed. So having that contact list also in a place where you can access it as the personal representative is so important. I kind of stumbled into it and stumbled around with it, but we made the best of it. You also want to have that written guidance for your funeral plans. One of the things that I knew about Sid is that he would want a traditional Jewish burial. And in fact, he had pre-planned his funeral and prepaid for it. And when we were going through his apartment, I found his prayer shawl and I took it with me to the arrangements for the funeral. I also knew he was a Navy veteran and probably would have wanted naval honors at the burial. Guess what? You need a form called a DD-214 to prove that a veteran had served. And I tore his office apart looking for that DD-214. I did find it, finally, but again, having all of that information together with your funeral plans would make it very much easier for your personal representative to carry out those wishes. And let's talk about death and taxes, shall we? Did you know that after you die, there's got to be one more tax return filed on your behalf? It's hard enough to do your taxes when you're alive. So, fortunately, because the trust company was taking care of Sid's financial affairs, they were going to handle that final tax return. I'm so thankful I don't have to do that. But we did have to shut down accounts, like your cable account. And then when you shut down the cable, you have to return the equipment to the cable company. So I was doing that. Sid was on oxygen. We had to get all the oxygen tanks and the concentrators returned to the healthcare company that was providing it. So there are all those details about a financial life that you need to take care of. And then also there's cleaning the apartment. Sid lived in an assisted living place, and we had to get everything out of his apartment in 30 days after he died. So tip number 1, downsize what you have. If you have objects that you would like specific people to have, why don't you give it to them while you're alive? And you can see the look of joy on their faces. We hope they would be joyful to get these objects. Maybe not, but downsize while you can. Sid and Jean had moved into this apartment, I'm thinking about just before she died, so in 2016. And we were finding packaged foods in the cupboards that had expired in 2017. So we were throwing out old food. It was a lot. And there were also clothing, furniture, household goods that needed to be distributed somehow. We donated a lot of the clothing to Goodwill. Our synagogue sisterhood was about to have a rummage sale, so many objects went there, and I felt good about that because they would have felt good supporting the sisterhood with their household goods. And then you also want to think about what's going to get done with photos and those really special keepsakes. I was packaging up photo albums, and when you're looking through photos, focus on the people. I found that there were a lot of vacation photos that were pictures of buildings and artwork, and it just didn't mean anything. But the pictures of people will mean something to family members. So hold on to the pictures, the old pictures. If you can label your pictures so people know who they are, that is a real blessing. I just wrapped up the last of packing up photos and keepsakes to send to a couple of distant relatives. I repurposed a box that had styrofoam, and I was cutting the styrofoam, and all these styrofoam beads were going all over my dining room and living room. So little pieces of Sid and Jean's lives are still floating around in my house. So being a personal representative is a big job, and you can get paid for it. Just check with, if your family member is asking you to do this, say, how much are you going to pay me per hour to do this? Because you can get paid for it. It is a big job, so help out those people that you're going to ask to be your personal representative. So write down your wishes and your directions. Put it in writing, talk to your loved ones, communicate. That is so important about what you'd like to see done. Organize your finances. If you can, prepay for your funeral. There are financing options. You actually get to buy an insurance policy to fund a funeral. You're not just giving your money to a funeral home. And downsize your possessions so that your life is more manageable for shutting down your house, your home, your apartment, wherever you lived. We do not know what tomorrow may bring. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. But I guarantee you, we do all have a date with death. And if we're going to help our loved ones, we show our love by planning ahead. And just know, just like talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead, so start a conversation today.
Gail, that was tremendous. I learned so much just listening to this little bit that you said. And it doesn't make me pregnant, and it doesn't make me dead, but it sure does make me alert to what needs to happen. Now, if you would like to learn how to do this, this is a real contribution that you made to our lives here this afternoon, just this little bit. Imagine getting to have some real time with Gail. I am sure it's just phenomenal for people who get the opportunity to hear her. If you'd like to learn more about that, come and join us at NSA. We hold monthly meetings. Some of them are hybrid. That is a little bit of virtual and a little bit of live, and some of them are live and some of them are virtual. During the pandemic, we got really, really good at doing virtual meetings, and we've decided that moving ahead in this year, that what we want to do is to continue to use that expertise that we have developed. So go to our website. It's www.NSA-NM, that's National Speakers Association New Mexico.org. Take a look at what we have to offer. We would love to have you join us and have the opportunity to see you grow and develop and become a fantastic speaker the way that Gail has. Thank you so much for joining us.